never expected to commit the perfect crime in broad daylight with 50 witnesses, but that's exactly what the HOA president called it when their $200,000 illegal bridge collapsed into my lake. The look of absolute horror on Diane Foster's face as she plunged into the muddy water, designer pantsuit ruined, mascara streaming down her cheeks, was worth every sleepless night of the 3-month nightmare she'd put me through. Was it petty of me to stand there smiling while cameras rolled? Maybe. But after 3 months of being bullied, threatened, and nearly robbed of my family's legacy, that moment of karma felt better than winning the lottery. Where are you watching this video from? Let me know in the comments while I tell you how this lakeside nightmare turned into the most satisfying revenge I never actually planned. I never thought I'd become the neighborhood rebel. My name's Jack Miller, and until 6 months ago, I was just a retired military engineer looking forward to some peace and quiet on my lakeside property. 5 acres of pristine woodland and shoreline that my father left me. The place where I learned to fish, where I built my first treehouse. Where I planned to spend my golden years watching sunsets with a cold beer in hand. This wasn't just any property. It was a slice of heaven that had been in my family for generations. My grandfather had purchased it back in the 1950s when the area was nothing but undeveloped countryside. Back then, there were no housing developments, no homeowners associations, and certainly no power-hungry HOA presidents trying to claim rights to land that wasn't theirs. After 22 years of military service, including 3 overseas deployments and enough bureaucratic nonsense to last a lifetime, I'd been looking forward to the solitude. My retirement plan was simple: fix up the old cabin my father had built, maybe add a workshop where I could tinker with vintage motorcycles, and spend my days fishing, reading, and enjoying the quiet life I'd earned. The property taxes were reasonable, the views were spectacular, and the neighbors, at least the ones I'd met when visiting over the years, seemed friendly enough. It was everything I wanted and nothing I didn't. That all changed the day Diane Foster knocked on my door. 5'6", perfectly highlighted hair, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. As the president of the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association, she had exciting news for me. The HOA wanted to build a footbridge across my property to connect the neighborhood to the public park on the other side of the lake. It would be such a wonderful amenity for the community, and they'd take care of everything. All I had to do was sign a simple agreement. I politely declined. My property was private, and a bridge would not only destroy the natural shoreline, but would bring constant foot traffic right through my backyard. I appreciate the offer, I told her, but I value my privacy and the natural state of the land. My father protected this shoreline for 40 years, and I intend to do the same. Her smile tightened. I understand your concerns, Jack, but you might want to review your deed. There's an easement clause from when this development was first built. The HOA may have certain rights regarding access through your property. With that parting shot, she left a folder on my porch and walked away, high heels clicking down my gravel driveway. Something about her confidence unsettled me. I'd reviewed all the paperwork when I inherited the property and didn't remember any easements that would allow for a bridge. Still, that evening I pulled out the sturdy metal box where my father had kept all the important documents. Property deeds, surveys, tax records, and the original purchase agreement from my grandfather's day. The musty smell of old paper filled my living room as I spread everything across the coffee table, a glass of bourbon at my elbow, and reading glasses perched on my nose. My father had been meticulous about keeping records, teaching me that good fences start with good paperwork. I spent that night poring over the ancient paperwork. There was indeed a vague clause about rite of passage dating back 30 years, but nothing specifically about construction rights or bridges. The language was deliberately ambiguous, the kind that would require a lawyer to untangle. The next morning, I received an email notification about an emergency HOA meeting scheduled for that evening. Curiously, my name wasn't on the recipient list. I only knew because my neighbor, Olivia Wilson, forwarded it to me. I didn't attend. Maybe that was my first mistake. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived informing me that the HOA board had unanimously approved the Pinewood Estates Lake Access Bridge project, with construction scheduled to begin in 30 days. They weren't asking for my permission anymore. They were telling me what they were going to do on my land. That afternoon, I called my old friend Alan Parker. We'd served together years ago before he left the military to become a real estate attorney. "Alan, I need your help," I said, forwarding him the HOA documents. They're trying to build a bridge on my property without my consent. Alan came over the next day, legal pad in hand and reading glasses perched on his nose. After reviewing everything, he leaned back in my porch chair and took a long sip of coffee. They're using an ambiguous easement clause to circumvent proper permissions, he said. It's legally dubious at best, but fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming. They're counting on you not having the resources or energy for a protracted legal battle. He tapped his pen against the paperwork. But I think we can get creative here. The smile that spread across his face told me he already had something in mind, something that made me curious about what exactly my old friend was planning. Ellen's legal analysis didn't offer much immediate comfort. The rite of passage clause they're citing was meant for utility access, not building permanent structures, he explained while we sat at my kitchen table. But they've gotten away with liberal interpretations before. They're operating in a gray area, and they know it. I poured us each another cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling my kitchen as the morning sun streamed through the windows. So, what you're saying is, even though they're twisting the intent of the clause, they might get away with it because of the ambiguous language. The thought made my stomach tighten. I'd faced plenty of bureaucratic nightmares during my military career, but this felt different. This was my home, my sanctuary. Alan nodded grimly. HOAs operate in this strange quasi-governmental space. They have tremendous power through covenants and bylaws, but there's often minimal oversight. Fighting them requires either deep pockets for legal fees or a strategy that turns their own rules against them. He tapped his pen thoughtfully against his legal pad. What we need is leverage, something that changes the cost-benefit equation for Diane and her board. Over the next few days, we dug deeper. Alan pulled records on the HOA's previous projects and discovered something interesting. The construction company selected for the bridge project, Rivertech Construction, had been awarded every major HOA contract for the past 3 years. That seemed unusual for a competitive bidding process. Even more curious, Rivertech was owned by a man named Greg Anderson, who seemed to have no prior experience building bridges. There's definitely something fishy about this whole arrangement, Alan said, showing me the contract amounts that seemed inflated compared to market rates. HOA boards typically don't push this hard unless someone's making money. The pattern was unmistakable. The tennis court resurfacing, that should have cost around $20,000, had been billed at $35,000. The clubhouse renovation had come in at nearly double the typical market rate. And now this bridge estimated at $200,000 when similar structures in neighboring communities had been built for half that amount. The numbers didn't add up. And in my experience, when numbers don't add up, someone's cooking the books. On Alan's advice, I reached out to Olivia Wilson, a neighborhood resident who worked at the county courthouse. She had her own history with Diane. Numerous petty HOA violations for everything from the color of her mailbox to the height of her garden gnomes. Over coffee at her kitchen table, she agreed to help us dig through county records. Diane Foster's been president for 5 years, Olivia said, scrolling through digital archives. Before that, she was a realtor specializing in luxury properties. Her ex-husband is Richard Thompson, who happens to be the city's building inspector. She looked up at me meaningfully. That might explain how some of these permits get fast-tracked. Olivia was a godsend. Smart, detail-oriented, and with a personal motivation to see Diane's authority challenged. Her dining room table became our war room, covered with property maps, zoning regulations, and historical documents. He'd been slapped with so many petty violations that she'd started keeping a journal documenting Diane's pattern of selective enforcement. She targets anyone who questions her, Olivia explained. It's how she maintains control. Most people eventually give up and fall in line because fighting each violation is exhausting. The real breakthrough came when Olivia discovered that my property had been purchased by my father before the HOA was established. According to the original subdivision documents, properties bought before the formation of the HOA had greater autonomy. The ambiguous rite of passage might allow for a walking path, but not a permanent structure like a bridge. This is gold, Alan said. Excitement evident in his voice as he reviewed the documents. Your father's purchase predates the HOA by 7 years. There's a grandfather clause in the county zoning regulations that limits how much control they can exert over pre-existing properties. They can't simply override your property rights with a board vote. Armed with this information, I felt more confident when Diane's surveying team showed up unannounced one morning. I found them placing stakes along my shoreline, measuring equipment in hand. "Excuse me," I called out, walking down to where they were working. "This is private property. You can't be here without permission." The lead surveyor, a young man who looked barely out of college, glanced awkwardly at his clipboard. "We have authorization from the Pinewood Estates HOA for preliminary site assessment," he said, showing me a document with Diane's signature. "That's not how this works," I replied firmly. "The HOA doesn't have authority to send people onto my property without my consent. Please pack up your equipment and leave." They left reluctantly, but the next day I received a violation notice from the HOA citing interference with community improvement projects and threatening a $500 fine. The war had officially begun. Over the next 2 weeks, I received additional notices for violations I'd never committed before. Grass half an inch too tall, unapproved landscape lighting, improper garbage can storage. Each one came with its own fine. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, which was predictably ignored. In response, I installed security cameras around my property perimeter. If they were going to trespass, I'd have it documented. The very next day, a contracting team arrived claiming they needed to conduct soil testing for the bridge project. I stood at my property line and refused to let them enter, recording the entire interaction on my phone. "You don't have permission to be here," I repeated calmly. "If you step onto this property, it's trespassing." They eventually left, but not before one of them muttered something about difficult residents making everything harder. That evening, another certified letter arrived threatening legal action if I continued to obstruct approved community improvements. Alan came over that night with pizza and a determined look on his face. "You know what Diane's really after, right?" he asked, spreading out documents across my coffee table. "Money. She's getting kickbacks from that construction company. I've got a contact in the industry who says Rivertech pays consulting fees to people who help secure contracts." He pointed to a line item in the budget for project consultation totaling $15,000. "If we disrupt that money flow, she might reconsider this whole bridge idea." We started researching Rivertech construction more thoroughly and discovered they had a history of safety violations that were mysteriously resolved without fines or penalties. As we dug through public records online, I stumbled across something interesting. "Alan, look at this," I said, turning my laptop toward him. Richard Thompson, Diane's ex-husband, was the signing inspector on all these resolve violations. And guess who one of investors is? The woman Richard left Diane for 3 years ago. Alan's eyebrows shot up. Well. Sounds like this bridge isn't just about money for Diane, it's about proving something." This personal connection explained why Diane seemed almost obsessed with the bridge project. It wasn't just business, it was vindication. The community meeting about the bridge project was held on a Tuesday evening at the Pinewood Estates clubhouse. I arrived early, taking a seat in the back row. The room filled quickly with curious residents, many of whom nodded politely in my direction. Diane stood at the front, dressed impeccably in a navy pantsuit, flanked by Greg Anderson from Rivertech and 2 other HOA board members. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice carrying that practice warmth that salespeople perfect. "We're excited to share details about our lake access bridge project, which will connect our neighborhood directly to Riverside Park. This amenity will not only improve our quality of life, but increase all of our property values." I watched as she clicked through a slick PowerPoint presentation showing renderings of an elegant wooden footbridge arching gracefully over the water. The images conveniently omitted that the bridge would cut directly through my backyard. As she discussed the minimal environmental impact and community benefits, I noticed an older gentleman near the front frowning and taking notes. I recognized him as Walter Scott, a retired engineer who'd lived in the neighborhood for decades. The presentation was masterfully done. I had to admit the renderings showed families strolling across a picturesque bridge, sunlight glinting off the water below with carefully placed benches where elderly residents could rest and enjoy the view. Diane emphasized how the bridge would add at least 15% to property values and create a unique selling point for our community in the competitive real estate market. She mentioned sustainability features and accessibility ramps, but conveniently glossed over the fact that the construction would destroy a wetland habitat that had been home to blue heron and painted turtles for generations. There was also no mention of the increased foot traffic, potential liability issues, or the fact that the direct access to Riverside Park meant strangers could now easily enter our previously secluded neighborhood. Greg Anderson spoke next, his demeanor that of a seasoned salesman despite his company's questionable qualifications. River is proud to partner with Pinewood Estates on this landmark project, he announced, sounding more like he was selling timeshares than discussing a construction project. Our specialized bridge design incorporates the latest engineering advances while respecting the natural aesthetics of the area. I nearly laughed out loud at that based on their previous work in the neighborhood. A clubhouse renovation that leaked after the first rainstorm and a tennis court that developed cracks within 3 months. Their idea of engineering advances seemed questionable at best. When Diane opened the floor for questions, I raised my hand immediately. I'd like to know how this project was approved without proper easement rights or the consent of the property owner, which is me. My voice was calm but firm. I'd also like to understand the bidding process that resulted in selecting Rivertech Construction, given that they've never built a bridge before. A murmur ran through the crowd. Diane's smile didn't falter, but her knuckles whitened around her pointer. The HOA has legal access rights based on the original development covenants. She responded smoothly. As for Rivertech, they submitted the most competitive bid that met all our specifications. Now, are there any other questions about the bridge amenities? She was deflecting, but I wasn't finished. Actually, I have a follow-up question about funding. The presentation didn't mention that HOA fees will increase by 12% to cover this project. Were all homeowners informed of this cost? This time the murmur turned into concerned chatter. Many residents looked genuinely surprised. Diane quickly jumped in. The modest fee adjustment was included in the quarterly newsletter. She gestured to the HOA treasurer, who nodded on cue. The board feels this investment will return value many times over in property appreciation. Several other homeowners began raising their hands, concerns evident on their faces. An elderly couple who lived on fixed incomes looked particularly alarmed at the mention of increased fees. But Diane expertly steered the conversation away from financials and back to amenities. Let's talk about the lighting features that will make the bridge safe for evening strolls, she said, clicking to the next slide. It was a classic bait and switch. Show them something shiny to distract from the cost. After the meeting, as people filed out, Walter Scott approached me. That was quite a show, he said, extending his hand. I'm Walter. I used to work on infrastructure projects before retiring. Jack Miller, I replied, shaking his hand. Did you know about this bridge before tonight? Walter shook his head. No, and I find that interesting since I was on the Architectural Review Committee until 2 years ago. He lowered his voice. Diane pushed me out after I objected to an overpriced road repaving project. The contractor was the same. Rivertech. I questioned their qualifications back then too. As we continued talking, Walter revealed more about his history with Diane and the HOA board. He'd been marginalized after repeatedly requesting detailed cost breakdowns for projects that seemed overpriced. They started holding meetings when I had medical appointments, he explained. Then they restructured the committees so that my expertise was no longer relevant to the decision-making process. His experience confirmed what I was beginning to suspect. That Diane systematically eliminated anyone who questioned her authority or business practices. We exchanged numbers and I suddenly had another ally. The following day, Alan and I created formational flyers detailing the true costs of the bridge project, the lack of proper permitting, and the questionable selection of Rivertech. We distributed them throughout the neighborhood, placing them in mailboxes early Sunday morning when most residents were home. The response was swift. Diane sent an urgent community notice claiming the flyers contained malicious misinformation that could result in legal action for defamation. She followed this with a personal visit to my home, her luxury SUV screeching to a halt in my driveway. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. When I answered the door, "Those flyers are full of lies. You're undermining a project that benefits everyone." I leaned against my door frame, arms crossed. "Everything in those flyers is factually accurate and documented. Diane, I'm just making sure my neighbors have all the information before their fees go up." Her eyes narrowed. "You know, Jack, life can get very difficult for people who don't cooperate with community standards. You might want to reconsider your position." 3 days later, I returned home to find a tree removal crew cutting down a 100-year-old oak near my shoreline. I sprinted across my yard, shouting for them to stop. "This tree is on my property. Who authorized this?" Their foreman showed me a work order signed by Diane citing hazardous conditions and necessary clearing for approved community projects. When I ordered them off my property, one of the workers reached for his phone. "Lady said you might cause trouble. She told us to call the cops if you interfered." "Go ahead," I replied, standing my ground. "Call them. This is private property and you're trespassing and destroying my trees without permission." The confrontation escalated until a patrol car arrived. Fortunately, the officer recognized that without a court order or my permission, the crew had no right to remove trees from my property. They left, but not before nearly half the oak's branches had been cut. That evening, I called Walter Scott and explained what had happened. "I could use your expertise on the bridge plans," I told him. "There has to be something wrong with them if they're rushing this much." Walter agreed to meet the next day. He reviewed the technical specifications I'd obtained through Olivia's courthouse connections. "This design is concerning," he said, pointing to the foundation plans. "The soil conditions on your shoreline require much deeper pilings than what they're planning. And these materials, they're cutting corners everywhere. This bridge wouldn't last 5 years, especially with our winter freeze-thaw cycles." As Walter and I discussed potential safety issues, my security camera alert pinged on my phone. The live feed showed Diane standing near my boathouse with Greg Anderson from Rivertech. They appeared to be arguing until Greg reluctantly handed her a thick envelope. Diane's expression as she took it was like a child being given candy. I didn't know what was in that envelope, but I knew exactly who would be interested in that footage. Jessica Brooks, the local newspaper reporter who covered community development, had been at the HOA meeting taking notes. It was time to call her. "Let me get this straight," Jessica Brooks said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "The HOA is forcing a bridge project through your property using questionable legal grounds with a contractor who has no bridge building experience. And you caught the HOA president possibly receiving money from said contractor." Her eyes lit up with journalistic interest. We were sitting at a corner table in a coffee shop far enough from Pinewood Estates that we wouldn't run into neighbors. I passed her a USB drive containing the security footage and copies of all the documents Alan and I had collected. "I'm not making accusations," I said carefully. "I just think there are legitimate questions about this project that deserve investigation." Jessica spent the next week digging. Her first article was measured but raised important questions about the bridge project's approval process, the selection of Rivertech, and the unusual speed with which permits were being processed. She also uncovered 3 other HOA contracts awarded to Rivertech over the past 2 years, all without competitive bidding. The fallout was immediate. Several homeowners started asking questions at the next HOA meeting. Diane responded by calling an emergency press conference in the clubhouse where she accused me of spreading falsehoods out of personal selfishness and unveiled an enhanced bridge design with additional features like built-in benches and decorative lighting. The new design, she announced, demonstrated the HOA's commitment to creating a world-class amenity that will be the envy of surrounding communities. The fancy new renderings worked. Public opinion began shifting against me. Neighbors who had previously been sympathetic started asking why I was standing in the way of progress. A few even approached me at the grocery store to suggest I should think about the community instead of just myself. Jessica's deeper investigation yielded something even more interesting. Through court records, she discovered that Diane's ex-husband Richard had left her for a woman named Patricia Harrington, who happened to be one of Rivertech's primary investors. "This bridge isn't just business for Diane," Jessica explained when she called to tell me it's personal vindication. If she can make this project successful, it's her way of proving her worth to the people who hurt her. This revelation explained Diane's almost fanatical dedication to the bridge project, but it didn't make my situation any easier. The pressure continued to mount. I discovered that several local businesses where I'd been a regular customer suddenly couldn't accommodate me. The hardware store owner apologetically mentioned that he couldn't risk crossing Diane because her HOA controlled access to many lucrative home maintenance contracts. As my community isolation grew, I needed to change tactics. That's when I remembered how my father had always welcomed neighborhood kids to fish from our shoreline. I started inviting families with children to visit my lakeside nature classroom where I taught them about the local ecosystem, fish species, and water conservation. Olivia, who had previously taught elementary school science, helped develop simple educational activity. The program became surprisingly popular. Parents appreciated the free educational outdoor activity, and children loved feeding the ducks and learning to identify different trees. I set up comfortable benches along the shoreline and created a small butterfly garden with formational plaques. Without announcing it formally, I had effectively created a private park that served the community better than a bridge ever would. Diane was furious when she saw my latest addition to the lakefront, a handcrafted wooden sign reading Miller's Lake Learning Center. She stormed onto my property waving a stack of papers. "You cannot operate a business from a residential property," she shouted. "This violates at least 6 different HOA regulations." I smiled calmly. "It's not a business, Diane. I don't charge anything. I'm simply inviting friends to enjoy my private property and learn about nature. Nothing in the HOA regulations prohibits that." Her face wrinkled as she flipped through her papers, searching for a violation that would stick. Finding none, she resorted to threats. "This bridge is happening whether you like it or not. The board has already approved additional funding and construction starts next week. Your little nature club won't stop progress." That night, I sat alone on one of my lakeside benches watching fireflies dance over the water. For the first time since this ordeal began, I seriously considered giving up. Maybe I should sell the property and move somewhere without an HOA. I took out my phone and started browsing real estate listings in rural areas. As twilight deepened, I found myself remembering my father standing on this very spot teaching me to cast a fishing line when I was 7 years old. "Land isn't just property, Jack," he'd said. "It's a piece of your family's memory." I could almost hear his voice carried on the evening breeze. That memory pulled me back from the brink of surrender. This land wasn't just dirt and trees. It was my heritage, and I wouldn't let it be desecrated by a poorly constructed bridge built for all the wrong reasons. Alan arrived with takeout dinner and found me still sitting by the lake. "Rough day?" he asked, handing me a container of pasta. I almost gave up. I admitted, started looking at property listings. He sat beside me on the bench. "You know what my father used to say? When someone tries to take what's yours, you have 2 choices. Run away or show them whose house they're in. Diane is trying to legally steal your land. What's your choice going to be?" I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. "I'm going to show her whose land this is." Alan grinned. "Good, because Walter, Olivia, and I have been working on something." He outlined a new strategy. One that didn't just aim to stop the bridge but to expose the entire corrupt operation. The plan was bold. Possibly risky, but it might be our only chance. As we fine-tuned the details, I felt my determination returning stronger than before. The next day, I expanded my Miller's Lake Learning Center by adding more benches, birdhouses, and a small dock where children could safely observe aquatic life. As families continued to visit and spread the word, my little slice of shoreline became a beloved community space. Without a bridge in sight, I was setting up the final bench when I heard tires screeching to a halt on my driveway. Diane stood there, face flushed with anger, clutching a folder of papers. "You cannot do this," she shouted. "This is a direct violation of." I cut her off with a calm smile. "Of what exactly?" "I've read the HOA regulations cover to cover. I'm simply enjoying my private property with invited guests. Perhaps you should review the rules yourself, Diane. I've just created a legitimate private park that's fully compliant with all regulations." For once, the HOA queen had no immediate response. She knew I was right, and it infuriated her. My private park became the talk of the neighborhood. Families visited daily, grandparents brought picnic lunches, and even some HOA board members secretly brought their grandchildren to learn about tadpoles and water lice. Diane and her allies tried desperately to find some regulation I was violating, but I had carefully ensured everything was within the rules. No commercial activity, no permanent structures, no excessive noise. Privately, Walter kept me updated on the bridge project. They finalized the engineering plans, and they're worse than I thought, he told me one evening, spreading blueprints across my kitchen table. They're using substandard concrete mix for the pilings and inadequate reinforcement for the span. This bridge would be lucky to last through 2 winter freezes. Things took an unexpected turn when Jessica Brooks called to tell me she was publishing an investigative piece on Rivertech's business practices. I found evidence of similar questionable contracts in 3 other communities, she explained. All fast-tracked, all overpriced, all with minimal oversight. And guess who approved the building permits? Richard Thompson. This news sent Dean into panic mode. The next day, she announced the bridge construction would begin immediately with completion targeted within 30 days, an absurdly accelerated timeline. She's rushing to finish before Jessica's investigation can stop the project, Alan explained. The construction crew arrived on a Monday morning, equipment ready. I stood at my property line as they approached. "You're about to trespass on private property," I warned them. "I have not given permission for this construction." The crew foreman, looking uncomfortable, handed me an official-looking document. "We have a temporary court order allowing access for the approved community project," he said. I scanned the paper. It was indeed a judge's order permitting the bridge construction to proceed while legal questions were resolved. I later learned through Olivia that the order was based on falsified permit documentation that Richard had fast-tracked while the regular inspector was on vacation. For the next week, I watched helplessly as crews drove palings into my shoreline. Walter monitored the construction surreptitiously, collecting samples of concrete when workers weren't looking. This mix is nowhere near the strength specified in the plans he confirmed after testing. They're using the absolute minimum they can get away with. Olivia discovered that Diane had circumvented normal permit reviews through her connections at the county office. She got signatures from people who never even saw the plans. Olivia told me this whole thing is built on paperwork fraud. I spent a sleepless night watching the bridge foundations take shape on my property. For the first time, I truly felt they might win. They had money, connections, and apparently the law on their side. Even with all our evidence, by the time any legal challenge made it through the courts, the bridge would be long completed. I sat by the lake until dawn, the same spot where I'd taught neighborhood children about water conservation just days earlier. The sky lightened gradually, revealing a thin fog hovering over the water. I pulled out an old hand-drawn map my father had left me showing the location of the valuable clay deposits along the lake shore. Clay of such high quality that artisans had once paid premium prices for. He had always protected this resource, refusing offers from companies that wanted to extract it. "Some things are worth more than money," he told me. That memory strengthened my resolve. I wouldn't let Diane destroy this land for her personal vendetta. Alan arrived early that morning with coffee and determined expression. "If we can't stop them from building the bridge," he said, "we let them build it and let them fail spectacularly." I was skeptical. "That sounds dangerous, Alan. I don't want anyone getting hurt." "No one will get hurt," he assured me. "But with Walter's documentation of all the safety violations and substandard materials, we can ensure that when they conduct their load testing, the bridge fails the inspection. Not catastrophically, but enough to prove it's unsafe." Walter joined us later to review the plan. "Based on the materials they're using and the foundation design, this bridge won't support the required test weight. It's simple physics." He showed me calculations detailing exactly how and where the structure would likely fail under standard testing conditions. "If we document everything properly, the failure will expose all the corners they've cut." I looked from Alan to Walter, considering the risks and potential outcomes. "You're saying we just let them build an unsafe bridge and then watch it fail its inspection?" Alan nodded. "Sometimes the best way to win isn't to stop your opponent, it's to let them." I studied the bridge plans, thought about Diane's relentless campaign against me, and made my decision. "All right, but we need to ensure nobody gets hurt, and we need to document everything. If we're going to watch them dig their own hole, we need all the cameras rolling when they fall in." The bridge construction continued at breakneck speed. Concrete was poured without proper curing time. Support structures were installed with minimal bracing, and safety standards were ignored at every turn. Walter and I documented each violation discreetly, building a comprehensive record of dangerous shortcuts. By the 3rd week, the bridge wooden walkway was taking shape. From a distance, it looked impressive. An arching wooden walkway spanning the narrow part of the lake. Up close, the flaws were obvious to anyone with construction knowledge. Misaligned joints, inadequate weatherproofing, and supports that already showed signs of stress before carrying any significant weight. I watched one evening as Diane brought several potential investors to view the nearly completed bridge, gesturing grandly as she walked them along the shoreline. She pointed toward my property repeatedly, no doubt explaining how this community improvement would enhance everyone's property values. What she didn't know was that her bridge was built to fail, and we would be ready when it did. The bridge was completed in just 6 weeks, a timeline that should have raised red flags for anyone familiar with construction projects. Diane wasted no time organizing a grand ribbon-cutting ceremony complete with local officials, community members, and even a small brass band from the high school. Glossy invitations went out to every household in Pinewood Estates, promoting the event as a celebration of community vision and progress. I received an invitation too, a pointed courtesy that Diane clearly hoped I would decline. Instead, I RSVP'd promptly that I would be delighted to attend. If the bridge was going to fail its load test, I wanted to witness it firsthand. The day before the ceremony, Greg Anderson from RiverTech submitted official documentation claiming the bridge had passed all required inspections. Walter obtained a copy through his contacts and called me immediately. "This is outrageous," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "They've completely fabricated these inspection results. The signature is from James Wilson, a structural engineer who's been out of state for the past month. It's an obvious forgery. We knew RiverTech had falsified the inspection report to claim the bridge was safe for public use, but we had no way to prove it before the ceremony." "It doesn't matter," Alan assured me, "the load test will reveal the truth. Physics doesn't lie, even when people do." The ribbon-cutting ceremony was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a bright Saturday morning. I arrived early, positioning myself discreetly at the edge of the gathering crowd. Walter was already there pretending to be an enthusiastic resident while actually monitoring the bridge's structural responses to even the minimal weight of the construction crew making final adjustments. Diane arrived in a new outfit that probably costs more than most residents' monthly mortgage payments. She worked the crowd expertly, shaking hands and accepting congratulations as if she'd personally built the bridge with her bare hands. Greg Anderson stood nearby, looking decidedly less comfortable. Each time the bridge creaked under the weight of workers, I noticed him wince slightly. Local officials arrived, including the mayor and 2 council members. Jessica Brooks was there too, notebook in hand, having been tipped off by Alan that this ceremony might produce more news than the typical ribbon cutting. We had strategically placed 3 hidden cameras to capture different angles of the bridge, ensuring that whatever happened would be thoroughly documented. At precisely 10 o'clock, Diane stepped up to a small podium set up near the bridge entrance. "Today marks a tremendous achievement for our community," she began, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "This beautiful bridge represents not just a connection between our neighborhood and Riverside Park, but a symbol of what we can accomplish when we work together toward a common goal." I had to suppress a laugh at that last part. The only common goal had been lining her pockets and satisfying her vendetta. She continued for several minutes, thanking various contributors and board members while noticeably avoiding any mention of my property or the controversy surrounding the project. "And now," she announced with a flourish, "I invite our honored guests to join me for the official ribbon cutting and the inaugural crossing of the Pinewood Estates Lake Access Bridge." Diane, Greg, the mayor, and several HOA board members gathered at the bridge entrance where a red ribbon had been stretched across the wooden planks. After a ceremonial cutting with oversized scissors and a round of applause, Diane led the group onto the bridge. Walter had positioned himself near me by this point. "Watch the middle section," he whispered. "The tension cables are already straining more than they should with just this small group." I noticed a thin sheen of sweat on Greg's forehead despite the mild temperature. He knew the bridge wasn't built to specification, but Diane was pushing forward regardless. More people began filing onto the bridge after the officials. HOA members, curious residents, even children excited to be the first to cross. Alarmed by the number of people, I started moving closer. "There are too many people on there," I said to Walter. "It wasn't designed for this kind of load." Walter nodded grimly. "I estimated it could safely hold maybe 15 adults at a time. There must be 30 people on it now." I received a text from Alan, who was positioned at the other end of the bridge. "Structure is visibly flexing. Get people off now." I began moving toward the bridge entrance, intending to warn people away when I heard Diane's voice ring out. "Jack Miller, come join us on your wonderful new community bridge. Don't you want to be part of this historic moment?" All eyes turned to me. Diane's invitation was clearly meant to force me into either publicly accepting the bridge or appearing petty by refusing. I stepped forward, but instead of walking onto the bridge, I raised my voice to address the crowd. "I think everyone should clear the bridge immediately. It hasn't been properly inspected and may not be safe for this many people." Diane's smile hardened. "Don't be ridiculous. The bridge has passed all required safety inspections. Are you really going to continue this obstruction even now? At that moment, a distinct creaking sound came from the center of the bridge. A few people looked around nervously, but Diane pressed on. It's just the natural settling of a new structure, perfectly normal. She turned to the mayor. Why don't we conduct our official load test now to prove to everyone how safe and well-built this bridge is? This wasn't part of the plan. Ceremony, the official load test should have been conducted by certified inspectors before any public use. Walter shot me a panicked look. She's rushing the load test without proper equipment or supervision. This is dangerous. Diane instructed everyone to spread out evenly across the bridge while she explained the engineering principles to the crowd. I received another urgent text from Alan. Middle support column shifting. Clear the bridge. I stepped forward again. Everyone needs to get off the bridge. Right now the support structure is compromised. Diane rolled her eyes dramatically. Still worried about our beautiful bridge, Jack? Or worried that you've lost? Her dismissive tone convinced most people to stay put, though a few parents wisely collected their children and stepped back onto solid ground. I heard the first crack, a sharp splintering sound that seemed to freeze time for an instant. It was so small that only I seemed to notice it, but the second crack was loud enough that everyone on the bridge heard it and heads turned in sudden alarm. The sound of wood splintering and metal groaning filled the air as the bridge began to tilt noticeably toward one side. For a split second, nobody moved, frozen in disbelief. Then panic erupted. People scrambled toward either end of the bridge as the wooden planks beneath their feet began to separate. Everyone off now, I shouted, rushing to help guide people to safety. Most made it to solid ground before the middle section gave way completely, collapsing with a tremendous splash into the lake below. Diane, Greg, and a few others who had been standing at the center were dumped unceremoniously into the water. Thankfully, the lake wasn't deep at that point. Maybe 4 but it was muddy and filled with construction debris. I waded in immediately to help, pulling a sputtering council member to shore while others assisted the remaining people. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured, though several suffered minor scrapes and bruises. Diane emerged from the water looking like a drowned cat, her perfect hair plastered to her face, designer outfit ruined, and makeup streaming down her cheeks. As someone helped pull her to shore, her prized Louis Vuitton handbag slipped from her grasp and plopped back into the muddy water, quickly becoming coated with cement residue and lake muck. A perfect visual metaphor for her thoroughly demolished dignity. Greg Anderson looked even worse, covered head to toe in mud and visibly trembling. Whether from cold or fear, I couldn't tell. The mayor stood on the shoreline, soaked to his waist, his expression transitioning from shock to fury as he realized the political implications of being associated with such a disaster. Jessica Brooks was furiously taking notes and photos, barely containing her excitement at witnessing such a newsworthy event. She approached me with her recorder as I helped the last person to shore. "Jack, were you expecting the bridge to fail like this?" she asked. I looked directly into her camera. "No, I wasn't expecting it to fail today. I thought they would at least wait for proper load testing, but I've been warning about this substandard construction materials and brushed building process for weeks. This bridge was never built to code." Diane, who had been receiving a blanket from a concerned neighbor, whirled around at my words. "That's a lie," she shrieked. "This was sabotage. He did something to make it collapse. He's been against this project from the beginning." Before I could respond, Walter stepped forward, notebook in hand. "Actually, as a licensed structural engineer, I've been documenting the construction violations from day one." He proceeded to list specific deficiencies: concrete mixed below strength requirements, inadequate support structures, improper tensioning of cables, and falsified inspection documents. "And here's the proof," Alan added, joining us with his tablet displaying the security camera footage of the collapse. The bridge failed exactly where structural integrity was compromised by substandard materials. No sabotage required, just physics. The mayor, trying to salvage some dignity despite his wet pants, immediately called for an official investigation. City inspectors arrived within the hour and began examining the collapsed structure and reviewing documentation. Richard Thompson was conspicuously absent, having suddenly called in sick when he heard about the bridge failure. Over the next week, the full extent of the corruption unfolded. Jessica's investigative piece revealed that River Tech had paid consulting fees to Diane for helping secure the contract. The falsified inspection documents were traced back to a junior employee in the building department, who admitted to forging them under pressure from his boss, Richard Thompson. The soil samples from the construction site revealed another bombshell: traces of the valuable ceramic-grade clay that made this lakefront property so special. Through further investigation, Jessica discovered that Diane had secretly viewed my father's old property records at the county office where he had documented the clay deposits. The bridge wasn't just a vanity project or revenge play, it was a scheme to gain access to a valuable natural resource. She never cared about connecting the neighborhood to the park. I explained to Jessica during our follow-up interview. She wanted access to the clay deposits that my father had always protected. With a bridge and public easement established, extracting the clay would be much easier to justify later as lake maintenance or shoreline improvement. The HOA board called an emergency meeting where homeowners demanded Diane's resignation. Greg Anderson faced multiple charges for building code violations and fraud. Richard Thompson was suspended pending an investigation into permit irregularities. The remaining HOA board members, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, unanimously elected Walter Scott as the new president. As the dust settled, I made a decision about my property. I signed legal documents donating a portion of the lakefront land to a conservation trust with specific provisions preventing any construction or resource extraction. My Miller's Lake Learning Center would become a permanent part of the community, a genuine public amenity built on honesty rather than greed. The new HOA under Walter's leadership established strict rules requiring full community votes for any major projects and monthly civic education sessions on property rights and governance. Transparency became their watchword with all contracts and budgets. At the first community gathering after the bridge collapse, I was surprised by how many neighbors approached to apologize for doubting me. We should have asked more questions. One longtime resident admitted it was just easier to go along with what seemed like progress. Diane and Greg both faced civil lawsuits from the HOA members for misuse of funds, while criminal charges for fraud and falsifying government documents were filed by the district attorney. Their legal troubles would likely continue for years, a fitting consequence for their actions. As for me, I continued to enjoy my sunset views from my lakeside bench, now often joined by neighbors who had become friends through this ordeal. One evening, Jessica stopped by to tell me her investigative series on HOA corruption had been picked up by a national news organization. "You know what the strangest part is?" she asked, sitting beside me as we watched ducks paddle across the water. "If Diane had just approached you honestly about what she wanted, negotiated fairly, and built things properly, she might have gotten a legal access point to the lake eventually." I nodded. People think shortcuts are the easy way, but they usually end up being the hardest path in the long run. A group of children ran past us toward the W's edge where Olivia was setting up a microscope for their weekly ecology lesson. One of them called out, "Mr. Miller, we found a turtle." A parent asked me, "Do you ever regret fighting so hard for this place? It would have been easier to just sell and move somewhere else." I looked around at the thriving natural space that had become the heart of our community. "You think I kept this land because of the money it's worth?" I replied, "No, I kept it because it's a place where kids can run free and where adults can remember what it means to respect nature." As twilight settled over the lake, I reflected on everything that had transpired. The twisted remains of the bridge had been removed, and nature was already reclaiming the shoreline. Diane's ambitions, like her Louis Vuitton handbag, had sunk into the mud of her own making. You don't need to destroy a bridge to win a battle. Sometimes you just need to let someone build it the wrong way and then stand back and watch them.